Good afternoon and welcome to DWIQ, Myths and Misconceptions of Alcohol and Drug Impaired Driving, a project of the Capital Region Transportation Safety Coalition. The coalition comprises approximately 350 traffic safety partners from 8 parishes surrounding the greater Baton Rouge area. We are one of 9 traffic safety coalitions in the state, and we are all working on data-driven policies and practices that will help us achieve our mission of destination zero deaths. My name is Catherine Childers, and I am a co-leader of the Impaired Driving Team, one of 6 emphasis area teams included in the Capital Region Transportation Safety Coalition. The other emphasis area teams are bicycle and pedestrian, distracted driving, infrastructure and operations, occupant protection, and young drivers. Future webinars will focus on these emphasis areas, so be sure to like us on Facebook so that you will receive notice of these presentations. We are thrilled that you have joined us today, and we are confident that at the end of this hour-long seminar, you will better understand the myths and misconceptions about impaired driving and raise your DWIQ. At any time during the presentation, you may submit questions to the panelists by typing into the question box located at the bottom of your screen. We will answer questions periodically throughout the webinar and then again at the end. If we are unable to answer all questions during the 1-hour presentation, we will email the answers to you. As an attendee of today's presentation, you qualify to receive a certificate of completion, and you will also be eligible to win 1 of 10 Walmart gift cards. However, in order to qualify for these items, you must remain until the end of the webinar and participate in the short survey that will automatically pop up on your screen. At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce Kenyatta Robertson, coordinator of the Capital Region Transportation Safety Coalition, who will introduce to you our expert panelists.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules on today to be able to join us for this webinar. We look forward to interacting with each of you and helping to raise your DWIQ. On behalf of the entire Capital Region Impaired Driving team, again, thank you so very much. At this time, I'd like to introduce to you your panelists for this webinar. First, we have Ms. Rachel Smith. Rachel is an attorney and a traffic safety resource prosecutor for Louisiana. She has been with the Louisiana District Attorneys Association for the last 5 years. Rachel's focus is on providing training and resources and education in the field of impaired driving. She is an active member of the Capital Region Impaired Driving team. Next, Corporal Jason Martin. Corporal Martin has been a member of the Baton Rouge Police Department for 18 years, where he actually currently is assigned to the DWI Task Force. Corporal Martin is a standardized field sobriety instructor, intoxilizer instructor, and a DRE expert, drug recognition expert, having made over 1,800 DWI arrests in his career. Corporal Martin is also an active member of the Capital Region Impaired Driving team, and he is active in other traffic safety emphasis areas as well. Up next, Mrs. Rebecca Nugent. Rebecca has been at the State Police Crime Lab for over 16 years. As the chemistry manager, she oversees toxicology, drug chemistry analysis as well. She's been an active member of the Capital Region Impaired Driving team since its inception. And her passion is teaching others about deadly drugs of abuse and the dangers of impaired driving. Lastly, I introduce to you First Class Trooper Taylor Scrantz. TFC Scrantz began his law enforcement career in 2014 with the Louisiana State Police. During his tenure with LSP, he has had the privilege to be certified as a standardized field sobriety test instructor, an AROD instructor, field training officer, TASER instructor, and a DRE. TFC's grants also had the opportunity to be a part of the Troop I DWI task force back in 2018, and he subsequently received the Mothers Against Drunk Driving Law Enforcement Recognition Award for the most DWI arrests in Lafayette Parish. TFC's grants currently serves as our Public Information Officer for Troop A in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I now will turn it over to Ms. Rebecca Nugent, who's going to kick us off with a few definitions. That's going to be very important as we navigate through today's webinar. Ms. Rebecca Nugent.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to begin with our presentation layout, which includes some important definitions. Myth 1 will be covered by Corporal Martin. We'll have a short Q&A, and then we'll go on to myths 2 and 3 with another short Q&A, which you just type those questions in, and then myths 4 and 5, and we will have some final Q&A for everyone to wrap up at the end. So some important definitions. These terms are going to be used throughout the presentation, so we just want to make sure everyone was on the up and up as to what these words mean. So impairment is the loss of physical or mental abilities that are necessary for someone to safely operate a motor vehicle. BAC is the initials for blood alcohol concentration, which is the amount of alcohol in a person's blood that is measured by an instrument and reported in the unit grams percent. Per se is the limit established in law that if a person's blood alcohol concentration equals or is greater than, impairment is presumed. Drug, any substance which when entered into the human body impairs a person's ability to safely operate a vehicle. Toxicology is the area of forensic science that tests a person's blood for alcohol or other drugs that cause impairment. The scientist generates a report with the results of the test conducted. And now I'm going to turn it over to Corporal Martin.
Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for joining us. First question we have for you is, can you only be arrested for a 0.08 grams percent BAC or higher? We'll give you a second to answer.
It looks like about 50% of people have voted. I'll give y'all about 5 to 10 more seconds, and then we'll go ahead and share the responses. All right.
All right. So it looks like 78% think that that is a false statement, while 22% think it's a true statement. The fact of the matter is, whether your BAC reaches that magical number of 0.08 or not, you can still be arrested. So let me say that again. If your BAC is at a 0.08 or even below a 0.08, you can still be arrested for a DWI. Your impairment level does not begin when you reach that magic number of 0.08 grams percent. That 0.08 is just a legal limit for the court system. You can definitely be arrested under a 0.08. Like I said a second ago, impairment begins much lower than that. From the time you begin to take alcohol into your body, it starts to affect your abilities to do things. Alcohol is what we call hydroscopic, meaning it seeks water. So alcohol is going to start finding places in your body where water is. One of the main places that we have water in our body is the brain. So as alcohol starts to get to our brain, it's going to start affecting how we can do things. It's going to start affecting our decision making. It's going to make us drowsy. It's going to make us relaxed. Some memory function may be impaired. So as we continue to drink, the impairment level will continue to increase. That's when your driving skills are going to really start to degrade. Your decision making is going to really become cloudy, and your memory is going to really become affected. And you start taking more risks that you normally would not take. You may jump off of that bridge into the river below whereas before you wouldn't do that. So why is this important? So divided attention. To drive a car, we have to do multiple things. We have to brake. We have to steer. We have to use a turn signal. We have to check our mirrors. We have to change lanes. We have to do all these things simultaneously sometimes. So as alcohol begins to impair, we lose the ability to do those things. So you start seeing you're unable to change lanes, or you're unable to maintain that single lane of travel. You're unable to use that blinker. You don't stop for that red light. You're speeding because your impairment is making it difficult for you to judge the correct time, distance, and everything that you need to drive safely. So as your BAC continues to climb, and we start getting up there into those higher levels, okay, we start to see the loss of consciousness. The danger that we have is alcohol poisoning, decreased breath, vomiting. Sometimes it even leads to death. So if a person is under 0.08 grams percent, how can they be charged with a DWI if they never made it to that level? The answer is simple. We're looking for impairment. All right. So based on the officer's investigation, and we're talking about from the time he first notices your vehicle to the time you stop your car, to the time you get out of your car, to the statements you make, to what you look like, to how you smell, all of that plays a factor. All right, and leads an officer into an investigation, which he should conduct, or probably will ask you to conduct, a 3-battery SFST, standardized field sobriety testing. He's going to ask you to do the horizontal gauge and stagnance test, the HGN, which is, if you've watched TV, I know it's popular on live PD right now, is the pin test or the finger test, where they move a finger across your field of vision. That's one of our 3 field sobriety tests. The second one is the walk and turn test, where an officer asks you to walk down a line, turn around, and walk back a line. All right, and our third test is the 1-leg stand, where an officer is going to ask you to balance on 1 foot and count out loud. So as the officer's watching you, he's watching you for clues. He's watching to see how you react to them, how you perform those, and he's going to make his decision to arrest you or not arrest you based on everything he's seen and heard and smelled up to that point. What about if you're under 21? Well, if you're under 21, there's a different legal limit for you. The legal limit for a person under the age of 21 is 0.02 grams percent, much lower than that 0.08 grams percent. But there's a kicker for this. An underage DWI does not require impairment whatsoever. It only requires the consumption of alcohol. Louisiana Revised Statute 1498.6 is underage DWI. You can be charged with that simply by consuming alcohol and driving a car if you're under the age of 21. So we've talked about impairment. We've talked about what alcohol does. We've talked about how the more you drink, the higher your impairment becomes. Mild impairment is still impairment, and therefore it's an arrestable offense, as the slide says. Buzz driving is drunk driving. Whether that impairment is small, slight, obvious, however you put it, impairment is impairment. That word in front of that impairment is just an adjective to describe that impairment. It's still going to be impairment. The best course of action that anybody can take is, if you're going to consume alcohol, do not drive a car.
We're going to stop for a short Q&A. Are there any questions for Corporal Martin?
If you have any questions, if you can, please submit them through the questions pod. Any questions? Do not be afraid to submit them.
All right.
Rachel, let me send over one question to you that I do see in the chat pod. That question will be directed to Corporal Jason Martin. Jason, what if I refuse to blow if pulled over for impairment?
So if you are pulled over and arrested for DWI and you refuse to take a breath test, there are penalties for your driving privileges. Obviously, your license can be suspended for a period of 1 year for the first refusal or 2 years for a second refusal. In addition to that, a police officer can also contact a judge and submit a warrant to that judge. If the judge finds probable cause, then a warrant will be issued and the officer will take you to a hospital, or he'll have a nurse or a medic, and they'll do a blood draw on you. So you'll be treated as a refusal because you refuse to take the test, but the officer is still going to get evidence if the judge finds probable cause for that blood draw.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Are there any other questions? All right, none at this time. Rachel?
Not seeing any other questions. We're going to move on to the next poll question. So I'll give y'all a moment to respond to that. DWI is only a traffic violation, is what it should say. Is that true or false? DWI is only a traffic violation. Gonna give y'all about 10 more seconds to vote. All right, let's look at those responses. So it looks like most people understand that DWI is not just a traffic violation. And that is correct. For a traffic violation, when you get a traffic ticket, say it's something like speeding or a parking ticket, usually the most you're looking at is a fine. But for a DWI, which is a criminal offense, the technical statute for it, it's called operating a vehicle while intoxicated, but we call it DWI for short. And when you get a DWI, you will most likely be arrested. You'll be brought to jail, you'll be fingerprinted, you'll be booked into jail, and you'll have to be bonded out to secure your release. If you are ultimately convicted of a DWI, you could be looking at up to 6 months in prison for a first offense DWI and all the way up to 30 years in prison for a fourth offense DWI. And DWI statutes are have some of the most stringent sentencing requirements that we have. So under most circumstances, a judge would also order community service. And it's not just any community service that you want to do. It's not just volunteering at the local animal shelter. Half of that has to be served doing litter detail. So for a first offense, 32 hours of community service, half of that, 16 hours, 2 full 8-hour days, have to be spent doing litter detail, which means orange vest on the side of the highway, picking up trash. A second offense, it goes all the way up to 240 hours of community service, and that is 120 hours doing litter detail, which means 15 full 8-hour days of litter detail. DWI sentences also require a court-approved driver improvement program and a court-approved substance abuse program. Now, these may be offered just the way it sounds in your parishes, but the judge could also order that you attend maybe Alcoholics Anonymous classes or a Mothers Against Drunk Driving Victim Impact panel, or, well, a substance abuse evaluation, but also that you follow any recommended treatment. Or you could have a judge who orders all of these things. I used to work for a judge who ordered all of these things for every DWI sentence. And it doesn't end there. If you get a DWI, there's a very high likelihood that your license will be suspended. So I know for young people, you really look forward to getting that driver's license. It means freedom and maybe some more independence. But if you get a DWI, that's going to severely cut into your freedom and independence. Like I said, your driver's license could, there's a good chance it will be suspended. And even if you're able to get a hardship license, then you would probably have to get an ignition interlock device installed on your car. And I know we all like having the latest technology, but that's probably not something that's going to be on your Christmas list. An ignition interlock device measures your BAC. You have to blow into it before you're able to start the car or to continue operating it. And all of these things cost money. They're not provided by the courts. All of the costs are borne by the offenders. So when you're arrested, if you took a breath test or if you had a blood draw taken, you will ultimately have to pay a fee for that if you're convicted. Fines could range from $300 up to $5,000, depending on what you're convicted of. Those programs we talked about, I would say a conservative estimate for the cost of them could range from $100 to $500. And the ignition interlock device, likewise, conservative estimate about $50 a month. So depending on how long you have it on there, that can add up. And finally, you have to have an attorney to represent you in these matters. And DWIs are very complicated cases, so attorneys don't come cheap. Again, conservative estimate, I would say, could range from $5,000 to $10,000. So getting a DWI could set you back, I would say, again, a conservative estimate, at least $6,000 to $15,000. And it's going to continue having negative consequences on your future. I know y'all are all familiar with the concept of having a criminal record, having a rap sheet. If you get a DWI, it'll be on your criminal record. That could affect future employment opportunities. A lot of industries need a clean background check. A lot of plants and refineries want that. I know the medical industry, if you're going to practice law, that will certainly come into play. Having a criminal record could also affect your eligibility for scholarships, your standing in school, and finally, car insurance. We know that that's already really expensive for young people. And if you get a DWI, those costs are going to go up even more. So yes, we do have really stringent sentences for DWI, and that's because it's a crime. That's because it only takes one person being impaired and operating a vehicle one time to hurt someone else or even kill someone else. Now we're going to launch a poll for the next session, the next section. Give y'all about 15 seconds here to answer. And let's see what the results were.
Well, I am delighted to see the results of this poll because it is true that there are other substances besides alcohol that can impair you. So in 2018, about 56% of the blood samples we tested had a BAC of 0.08 or greater. But then on the other hand, we had 51% of them test positive for one drug other than alcohol that can cause impairment. So about 78% of the blood samples that we test has alcohol and or one drug of impairment. The actual average combination is alcohol at or above a 0.02 and 3 drugs or metabolites that could cause impairment. We know of many drugs that can cause impairment, but if we want to look at the age group that this webinar was focused on, 16 to 20, we'd have to look at that data. So I did that. I pulled that data to show what we needed to discuss today. And in 2018, 39% of drivers 16 to 20 years old that we tested their blood had at least one drug that would impair other than alcohol. That's almost 4 out of 10 drivers on the road. So next time you were with a group of your buddies, it's 4 out of 10 of them that would have the probability of having one drug if they were tested at the crime lab. So let's look at the top drugs. Number 1 is THC, and THC is the main psychoactive drug found in marijuana. Number 2 is diazepam, which is brand name Valium. It is a prescription anti-anxiety medication. Number 3 is carisoprodol, also known as Soma. It is a prescription muscle relaxer. And an honorable mention is hydrocodone. This is Lortab. This is a prescription opioid pain medication that is not only very impairing, it is also very addictive. And we have an opioid crisis on our hands right now in this country, and this is one of the drugs that was mainly prescribed that caused this opioid crisis. Colorado, after they legalized marijuana, since it is the #1 drug found in blood samples in this age group, had a 25% increase in marijuana-related DUI citations, a 112% increase in marijuana and alcohol citations, a 40% increase in fatal crashes, and a 145% increase in drivers testing positive for marijuana. And I think this is our next Q&A session.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel and Rebecca. You guys have quite a few questions that are fielding through the question pod right now, and they are absolutely awesome. I'm going to send a few of them over to your way. One of the first ones that just came through now was, can energy drinks cause impairment?
There is some evidence that caffeine can affect your ability to focus, and especially in combination with other drugs can potentially cause impairment. But this is Rachel, I would have to refresh on that before I gave an answer that I'd want you to quote. So I can look into that and maybe get back directly with the questioner.
Absolutely. We do have his name here on board, and we'll make sure we get that correct response back to them. We do have another question. Can a DWI be expunged?
A DWI can be expunged under certain circumstances. And this is such a lawyer non-answer, but it really depends what you're convicted of and which provision the judge sentences you under as to when and if it can be expunged. But the important thing to remember is that even if it is expunged, that only takes it off the records for the public. Law enforcement can still use it. If you were to get another DWI, it can still, for example, if you had a first offense DWI, law enforcement could still use that to enhance it for a second DWI if you were to be arrested again within a certain period of time.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you so much for those questions. I'm going to give you one more just before we get started into the next myth. That question is, have DWI arrests been higher or lower in 2019? And is there any data available that can be shared? Not sure if one of our law enforcement partners that's on the call, would you like to take that question? Have DWI arrests been higher or lower in 2019?
Hey, can y'all hear me?
Absolutely. Thank you, TFC's
Okay.
Grant.
Yes, ma'am. So we'd have to actually pull the data from our database to see if the numbers are higher or lower than that. What we can say is there hasn't been a major increase or major decrease in the number. It's about what as it has been. So nothing major that we've had to report on, but it is very consistent. I can tell you in the Troop A area alone, we've already had 19 fatal crashes, and 2 of those crashes were a direct result of impairment. And we still have several of those crashes still under investigation with impairment results pending. So it's a very prevalent problem we see, and we actually dedicate certain troopers to the DWI task force, and they make DWI arrests every single night of the week.
Awesome. Thank you so much. You guys, these questions are absolutely amazing. I'm going to keep that tally going. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our next presenter. I'll have another round of questions ready for you guys shortly. Thank you.
All right, we're going to move into the next polling question. Marijuana is natural and therefore harmless. True or false? Give y'all about 15 seconds to answer. Let's look at those results. Looks like
Excellent.
most folks said that was false.
Looks like we have a very highly educated group of attendees. So we're going to take a deep dive into marijuana because it is the #1 drug that we see not only in this age group of 16 to 20-year-old drivers, but it is the #1 drug other than alcohol that we find in a person's blood when we test it here at the lab. So I'm going to get really sciencey on you right now, so just bear with me. We're just going to go through some general marijuana information, just so if I say something, you understand it. THC is tetrahydrocannabinol. It is the principal psychoactive drug found in marijuana, which causes a range of noticeable effects on behavior. CBD is cannabidiol. It is a non-psychoactive drug found in marijuana, which has been proven beneficial in treating childhood seizure syndromes. The word botanical means green vegetable form of marijuana. A preparation is when THC is extracted from the botanical form. Edible means a food or candy made with extracted THC. Vaping is inhaling nicotine, THC, or another drug via an electronic heating device or e-cig. Concentrate is a substance that is very potent with THC. Street names include butter, shatter, wax, glass, dabs, oil, BHO, etc. This is a chart that comes from a journal article in which they tested people who were volunteering to consume marijuana and THC and then have their high tested as well as their performance. As you can see, the pink line where THC concentration in the blood drops goes down very rapidly, but that subjective high, the person's personal reporting that they still felt impaired, stays relatively high, and their performance level stays relatively high. So this means that whether or not we test your blood, that the amount of THC in your blood is not directly correlated to how high or impaired you are. This is also another chart that we use. It demonstrates that THC levels have increased in botanical marijuana over the years, whereas the non-psychoactive ingredient, CBD, has remained very low. The reason why this is important is because CBD acts as a regulator to the THC's binding affinity, which if we don't have a regulator, then the psychoactive ingredient therefore has more impact on your performance and your behavior. And so this is why the strain and potency of marijuana is so important to understand. The manner of ingestion is also very important. The way a drug enters the body. If it's smoked or vaped, the feeling of the high or the impairment is almost instant because it goes through the lungs and enters the blood and then enters the brain. If it's consumed in a candy or orally, it has to go through the gut before it can enter the blood, and therefore it takes a while to enter the brain. This diagram represents the statement I just made. As you can see, if you smoke marijuana, that blue line, the THC, increases in your blood very rapidly. Whereas if you consume an edible or a candy, it may take a couple hours for that onset to happen. And this is where people get very irresponsible, where they consume an edible and then they wait a little while, but not quite long enough, and then they consume more because they don't feel high. This is why we've had an overall increase nationwide in people who consume edibles presenting at emergency rooms and calling for emergency rescue. They don't like to call it an overdose, they call it an overexposure. People who have this overexposure report very negative side effects of when this occurs. This is a good example of that. Maureen Dowd, she was a New York Times author of a column, and she said that she ate an edible and for an hour she felt nothing. She ordered dinner and room service and then began drinking some wine. She then felt a very scary shudder through her brain and body, barely made it from the desk to her bed, and she curled up in a hallucinatory state for 8 hours. She was thirsty but couldn't move. She was paranoid. The room service waiter knocked on the door and she didn't answer because she thought he would call the police. She strained to remember where she was and what she was wearing. She was paranoid and became convinced that she had died and no one was telling her. It took all night before it began to wear off, distressingly slow. So if this happens to an adult who volunteered to experience what an edible felt like, could you imagine if someone who is young and naive and not an avid user would experience if they would consume or overconsume an edible? So the thing I always get told is that it's safe because it's natural and from the earth. Well, marijuana of the 60s and 70s does not look like the marijuana of today. Today, commonly, marijuana, the THC is extracted from it using butane. Butane is a chemical that they use to strip the resin or the THC out of the actual marijuana plant by using an extraction device. And it ends up making this honey-colored liquid that can be used in a variety of different ways. It can be smoked, it can be put in a variety of different products. And it is very potent and high in THC. It can also be very flammable. The boiling point of butane is less than 32 degrees. Therefore, a simple spark like static electricity could cause it to ignite and catch your house and other homes on fire as well if you try to do this on your own. It's a very dangerous process. It also causes a lot of garbage and pollution because you cannot legally throw away all these containers in a trash receptacle without law enforcement getting suspicious. So they normally will dump these large amounts of cans and other rubbish out into natural parks and forests. This is an example of an edible that we got at the lab from California. It says it has 300 milligrams of THC, but nowhere on the front of this package does it say what a serving size is and how much is in each bear. But if you flip it over, you can actually see that the serving is one gummy bear. that is a very small, very potent bite-sized piece of candy that contains 300 milligrams of THC. This is a vape pen that we got in that also contained THC. The labeling says that it contains 734 milligrams of THC. This cartridge claims that a 1 to 3 second draw on it is one dose, which contains 10 to 15 milligrams of THC. So this one vape pen has upwards of 70 to 80 doses of THC in this one vape pen. These are some other products that we get, the dabs, the waxes, and the oils. Once THC is extracted from botanical marijuana, it can be added to almost anything, including but not limited to cereal bars, chocolate candy, drinks, pizza sauce, and Juuls or other e-cigarette devices. The Juul and other e-cigarette devices are not intended to be used to smoke THC, but we have seen them where people have modified the device and added THC oil to them to smoke it through a nicotine device. E-cig or vapes associated with lung injury. There have been over 2,700 hospitalizations, 60 deaths. The CDC and the FDA recommend do not use e-cig or vape products of any kind, and that vitamin E should not be used to be added in any e-cig or vape product because this can cause lung damage.
And like Rebecca said, there are a lot of various medical effects and even mental health effects that can come as a result of both smoking marijuana and ingesting it orally. So one of the unusual medical effects they started to notice in Colorado was people kept presenting at the emergency room with this uncontrolled vomiting. And they finally did a study and realized that it was happening in people who were habitual marijuana users. And, 3 people died. It was very difficult to treat. So we're seeing more and more of these new and novel issues, the more that products are being made readily available, but also the higher concentrates we're seeing. And there are, like I said, a lot of study is being done on the effect on mental health. So this is particularly an issue for young people. They say up until 26, the brain is still developing. So if you're using marijuana in that stage of your life, it can permanently affect your brain and your behaviors. There's been studies that show that using marijuana has been linked to the development of social anxiety disorders, that it can make depression and PTSD worse. It's also been shown to cause episodes of psychosis if you use marijuana regularly. So you're 3 times more likely to undergo a psychotic episode if you use marijuana regularly. And if you're using the high potency products regularly, you're 5 times more likely to undergo a psychotic episode. And one of the issues that they see with this, especially in the states where marijuana has been legalized, is that people who are having psychotic episodes are more likely to commit crimes and sometimes even violent crimes. And this was just a cautionary tale of a guy who went to Colorado. He's a 23-year-old guy. His family said that he was always happy, really well adjusted. And he went to Colorado on a ski trip with his family and bought some edibles. He ate some of them, and then, kind of like Rebecca said, he wasn't feeling the effects, so he finished them. And then his family said they'd never seen him like this. He became jittery and incoherent. He couldn't make eye contact with anyone. He wouldn't speak to anyone. So his friends and family end up going out to dinner that night, and he stays at the condo. And sadly, he ended up taking his own life that night. And his family says if not for the marijuana, that never would have happened. So just a lot of effects that are not foreseeable with these products that aren't necessarily regulated.
And so I was asked to talk about CBD because there's a lot of it in the media right now. So CBD is not legal to be added to any food item unless the FDA okays it. And at this point, the FDA has not. There's only been one product called Epidiolex that is FDA approved, and it is only for 2 very specific childhood seizure syndromes. It has been shown to mediate the psychotic or psychoactive effects of THC in humans. It inhibits the THC elicited paranoid symptoms of users, but it does not reduce impairment. At this time, CBD products are in the gray area of the law and have no regulations. The ATC is working on this, and I think it got pushed back due to the COVID situation, but I'm always looking forward to see when those regulations will come out. Vendors who sell CBD oils, sometimes with no quality checks, sometimes they have little to no CBD, sometimes they have huge amounts of CBD with trace THC, and some have even tested positive for other synthetic drugs that are very dangerous. So basically, what I tell people about CBD is using them is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get.
All right, y'all, last polling question. Give you about 15 to 20 seconds to answer this one. People are still answering. I'm going to shut it down in about 3, 2, 1. All right. Let's look at those responses.
All right, so I'm Trooper First Class Taylor Scrants, and those responses were great because that question was in fact false. Even though you're prescribed a medication or you get a medication over the counter, that does not mean that you can drive while taking that. A lot of bottles, as you can see, it warns you about operating a motor vehicle or heavy machinery. And the reason for that is it impairs you in a lot of ways the same way alcohol does. And even sometimes more so than alcohol does. That's why, and a perfect example of that is when you go to the dentist to get your wisdom teeth removed, they require you have a sober driver there to bring you home. And the reason for that is you're impaired. You can't safely operate a motor vehicle. So once you take a prescription medication and add that to alcohol, that is when you start seeing your extreme levels of impairment. From my personal experience, those were the most impaired people we would arrest for DWIs, or those mixing alcohol with prescribed medications. So to continue on what I was saying, just because the doctor orders a RX doesn't mean make it safe to drive. There's a lot of misconceptions. I've thought a lot of people on the side of the road said I'm under the care of a doctor and they've told me I can take this medication, and a lot of times we'll use that prescription as evidence against them for a DWI trial. And the reasons for that is drowsiness, aggressive or reckless driving. And like Corporal Morton alluded to earlier, we're not arresting based on BACs. We're arresting based on impairment. So if you get arrested for DWI and you blow all zeros on the intoxilizer, that's irrelevant. I arrested you because you're impaired, and that's the whole point of the standardized field sobriety tests. It's a deviated attention test, the latter of the two. And there are specific law enforcement officers that are known as DREs that are trained very extensively to detect this sort of impairment. We look for pupil size, we look for slurred speech, unreliable balance, and all those things of that nature. And these guys are highly trained to detect this sort of impairment. All right, so here's a perfect example of I've actually had to arrest someone for DWI for taking too much NyQuil. Me personally, when I take NyQuil, I become extremely drowsy. I can't keep my eyes open. And a quick anecdote of when I was working patrol, I actually stopped a vehicle on I-49 and they were going north in the southbound lanes. The driver gets out of the vehicle and can't walk. She has consumed no alcohol at all. She drank a whole bottle of NyQuil. She was subsequently arrested and charged with DWI. We went to trial and she was found guilty. She blew all zeros on the intoxilizer machine, but whenever her toxicology report came back, it showed she had NyQuil in her system. All right, so here is a example of someone getting involved in a fatal crash who was under the influence of medications. This happened in New York in 2010. This accident killed Catherine Underdown and had all these similar symptoms of a drunk driving case. Through investigation, the police were able to determine she was taking several prescription medications, including a sedative and a muscle relaxant, and she was subsequently charged with vehicular manslaughter and driving under the influence of drugs. In the state of Louisiana, DWI is DWI. It doesn't matter if you're driving under the influence of drugs or influence of alcohol. The penalties are the exact same for a DWI. There's no stipulation saying the penalty will be this if you're driving under the influence of alcohol or that if it's driving under the influence of drugs. It's all the same.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Trooper Scrantz, for that presentation. This kind of nears us to the end of raising your DWIQ. Before we kind of take care of any last minute details about the webinar, I definitely want to turn it back over to our attendees. We do have a little bit of time that's left. And I definitely want to give you guys the opportunity to be able to field in some questions to us through your questions pod. They've definitely been coming in, and I'm so appreciative of just your attentiveness during this webinar. The team and I definitely hope that you guys are learning something that you didn't know at the beginning, of joining us for this call. We definitely want to make sure that it's educational to you and that we kind of make sure we give you some time to ask us any questions that you may have. And so to my panelists, that is still there. One of the questions that's just rolled through, and any of you will probably be able to answer this question for me, is how do officers test for marijuana use? That may be a great one for you, TFC Scrantz, if you can. The question is, how do officers test for marijuana use?
So just like any other traffic stop, you get stopped for a traffic violation, whether that be speeding, driving left of center, or whatever it may be. And once the officer makes contact with the driver, that's when we begin to detect signs of impairment. Now, specifically in relation to marijuana, we notice several things. Marijuana has a very extreme odor you will smell. That was always an indicator for me. Reddening of the conjunctiva. The layman's term would be for the whites around the eyes. When you smoke marijuana, the whites around your eyes get extremely red. That's also another sign of consuming marijuana. And once we get the indicators, this individual has been consuming marijuana, then we'll ask them to participate in a filter body test. And although you're not going to see nystagmus, which is the eye test on a marijuana arrest, just as an alcohol arrest, you do the walk and turn and one leg stand test. And when we detect impairment on that and we get enough clues to arrest someone, we do so. More times than not, they'll blow all zeros on the intoxilizer. However, after that is done, we'll request a urine or blood sample. And, it's just like I said, it's the same exact penalties for driving under the influence of alcohol as it is driving under the influence of marijuana or prescription medication.
Thank you so much, Trooper Grant. Our next question is, most people think that it's legal to drive under the influence of marijuana just because it has been prescribed by your doctor. The question is on that one is, can any of our panelists share any information on how true or untrue is that if prescribed and your doctor gives you marijuana to take, is it legal to still drive under the influence of that because your doctor prescribed it?
The answer to that simply would be no. It is not okay to drive under the influence of marijuana just because your doctor prescribes it. And the reason for that is anything that impairs your ability to operate a motor vehicle is capable of getting you charged with DWI at the end. It doesn't matter if your doctor prescribes you Advil. If Advil is going to impair your ability to drive, you can still get arrested for DWI. And the same goes with marijuana.
Thank you for that. Next question. Can being hung over be considered impaired driving?
So that also, Rebecca can throw her knowledge in on this. Alcohol, which is ETOH, dissipates from the body on average 0.015 grams percent. That's what we measure alcohol in. So when you get arrested for DWI and you blow a 0.08, we measure that in grams percent. So if you're out drinking all night and at midnight you peak at a 0.200 grams percent, you can add that up into the morning and you could still be over the legal limit depending on how the alcohol metabolizes in your body. So yes, even though you've stopped drinking for 8 to 10 hours, you can still be over the legal limit and presumed impaired.
Yes, Tyler, that is correct. And for a lot of people that have built up a tolerance to alcohol, someone that may consume alcohol on a daily or almost daily basis, their blood alcohol level can get up to a 0.3 or 0.4, which for a normal person would be fatal. But we routinely see blood alcohol levels at a 0.3 to a 0.4, and they're not unconscious.
And to also add to that response, we actually had a case in Troop I when I was on the road. An individual was arrested for DWI, first offense, at 12 o'clock during the day, and he blew a 0.25. I think 8 hours later, he was involved in a fatal crash and was subsequently arrested for vehicle homicide, and he blew exactly a 0.08. So yes, that would be an example of that.
Thank you, panelists. Can a person be arrested if they have beer containers or an alcohol container on the floor of their vehicle?
I think that'd be a very rare circumstance. That would not warrant an arrest. The only thing that may warrant if the alcoholic container was open and it had alcohol in it, you could be charged with a traffic summons of open container, which is a misdemeanor.
And Trooper Grants, that would be something that the officer would take into account in the totality if he also believed that the person was impaired, right?
Correct. Yeah, we'd definitely use that as evidence. It would be in correlation with, we detected a strong odor of alcoholic beverages on Mr. Smith's breath, and we subsequently found an open 24-ounce Bud Light in his vehicle. This shows that he was in possession of alcohol that was open while in the vehicle, which is adding to the case of he was actually consuming alcohol as well.
Awesome, thank you. I have another question coming in. What is the latest on guidance for DWI arrest on non-traditional vehicles such as bicycles, motorized bicycles, golf carts, electric vehicles, and motorized scooters?
So, to my knowledge, to be arrested for DWI, the motor has to be a certain amount of cc's to meet that threshold of a motorized vehicle.
Right, so it does have to be a motorized means of conveyance. So you couldn't get it on you couldn't get a DWI on a regular bicycle in Louisiana.
Thank you, panelists. I'm now going to just take the last two questions from our question pod before we get ready to end the call. One of those questions is, those who sell CBD oil think it's great for every ailment and find it to be safe. Is that true?
I can only attest to the samples that the ATC has sent to us from various stores around the state. So while one drug is not going to cure everything from male pattern baldness to toe fungus, which they are claiming this drug does, it also right now has very little to no mandatory testing, and that's going to change in the near future, from what I understand through the ATC. But once that comes up and running, they're going to see that some of these products are not exactly advertising as what they really are. We've tested some products with no CBD. We've tested some products with THC and CBD, and we've had several edibles and oral tinctures submitted recently that had synthetic cannabinoid drugs. Those are the mojo drugs. Those are the drugs that cause severe paranoia and delusions and lead to very severe medical ramifications of people who use it. And I could not imagine using a drug or something that I've found from a holistic store to think that it's going to make me feel better and end up getting something that is so dangerous. So yes, some of these products are not legitimate. I can't say which ones are and which ones aren't because I haven't tested them all, but some of them are not.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our final question for the webinar is, given the potency of THC, why has the governor in Louisiana legislature posing to legalize marijuana?
That is a great question. I sit on the governor's drug policy board as well as several other boards, and it's being discussed because other states have also legalized it for recreational use. But if we look at other states, and Rachel can definitely back me up with more information on this, that the cost to public health just in general has gone up because people think that because it's legal, they should just use it. 60% of babies born in Colorado right now test positive for THC. So it has nothing to do with just the impairment in driving. It has to do with the overall public health.
Correct. I think a lot of people are under the impression that once marijuana is legalized, it'll be a huge revenue stream for the state. But it turns out in many of the states where it's been legalized that that any increase in revenue is countered by the cost to the state in medical services and crime, those sorts of things. So it's not the win that people think it is in most circumstances.
To our panelists, thank you so much for your time today. This has been absolutely amazing. We've neared the end of our webinar. I want to also take the time on the behalf of our Impaired Driving Capital Region team to thank all of our participants that signed up for today's webinar. It's been very mind-blowing to see how many people out there are just so interested in raising their DWIQ and just remaining educated on the consequences of driving while impaired, whether that's alcohol, whether it's drugs. We thank you for committing to your time on that. Just want to let you know, before you go, do not forget, there's going to be a quick survey that is going to pop up on your screen as this webinar comes to a close. Please make sure to answer those questions on that survey. That is going to help us to identify what you have the certificates of completion to at the end of that call. You guys will be receiving those certificates later today to have that as well. Also, if you have any other additional questions, my email address is there on the screen, Kenyatta Robertson, and it's krobertson@crpcla.org. Feel free to send me those additional questions that you guys have. I will channel them through our panelists make sure we get an answer back to you on today. Each of you that are still on the call, after you take your survey, your name will go into a raffle. We have 10 Walmart gift cards that will be raffled off after the card today. We're really excited about that. So until next time, you guys, please be safe. We look forward to meeting and speaking with you again. Everyone have a great day, and we'll see you soon.